It's been 8 months since Desmond left, 8 long months that somehow feel like years. And now I spend my days on my knees scrubbing floors, just to buy myself a little more time to live inside the Whitmore family mansion. My name is Benedict. I am 24 years old, a low-class Omega from a poor background, and an orphan with no family left in this world. If someone had told me a year ago that I would one day become a maid inside my own mother-in-law's house, I would have laughed right in their face, because even the thought would have sounded ridiculous. But life has a cruel way of turning laughter into reality. A few months before Desmond left, he brought me to meet his mother for the first time, proudly telling her that I was the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. I still remember the way she looked at me the moment I stepped into the massive living room, like I was trash that someone forgot to dispose. Her sharp eyes slowly scanned me from head to toe, lingering on my shoes for a second longer than necessary. And in that moment I already knew something was wrong, because the air around her felt cold, despite the luxurious warmth of the mansion. Maria Whitmore sat elegantly on the couch with one leg crossed over the other, her posture straight. Her fingers resting calmly against the armrest like a queen sitting on her throne. Her lips curved into something that could almost pass as a polite smile, but her eyes carried nothing but judgment. Desmond sat beside me, his hand gently holding mine, his thumb occasionally brushing against my fingers as if silently telling me not to worry. But the nervousness inside my chest kept growing with every second that passed. Then Maria finally spoke. "So," she said in a calm voice that sounded almost pleasant, "what exactly do you do for a living, Benedict?" The question was simple, yet the way she asked it felt like a trap waiting to snap shut the moment I answered. "I work at a small A near the university," I replied carefully. Her eyebrow lifted slightly, as though she had just heard something mildly disappointing. "A cafe?" she repeated slowly, leaning back against the couch as her gaze returned to me with even more scrutiny than before. "Yes, ma'am." There was a short silence before she asked the next question, her tone still calm, but carrying a subtle sharpness that made my shoulders tense. "Do you perhaps hold any position in a corporate company? Maybe management or administration?" "No, ma'am," I answered honestly. "I see." She nodded slowly as if mentally checking something off a list. "And tell me," she continued, tilting her head slightly, "do you own any estates, properties, or shares in any businesses?" My throat suddenly felt dry. "No, I don't." Her lips curved faintly, though it was far from a kind smile. "Interesting," she said. Desmond almost interfered, but she cut him short. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment, before she spoke again. "Your family must have built something for you at least. Perhaps land or a trust fund waiting for you." The words hit deeper than she probably realized. "I'm an orphan," I said quietly, forcing the words out even though my chest tightened. "My parents passed away when I was very young." For a brief moment the room became completely silent. But instead of sympathy, what I saw in Maria Whitmore's eyes was disappointment. She exhaled softly as though the final piece of information had confirmed everything she suspected. Then she turned her gaze toward her son. "Desmond," she said calmly, "this Omega does not fit your circle." My fingers tightened together on my lap as the words settled heavily in the room. She didn't even try to hide her disapproval anymore. "You are the heir of the Whitmore family," she continued, her voice growing firmer. "You run companies worth millions. You meet people of influence every day. And families like ours associate with people of equal standing." Her eyes slowly returned to me. But this one she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The meaning was painfully clear. I lowered my gaze, trying to ignore the burning feeling spreading across my face. But before the silence could stretch any longer, Desmond finally spoke. "Mother," he said calmly, though there was a firmness in his voice I had rarely heard before. "I didn't bring Benedict here for an interview." Maria looked at him. "And what exactly did you think you brought him here for?" she asked. Desmond's hand tightened gently around mine, his warmth grounding me. "I brought him here because he's the person I'm going to marry." The words stunned the entire room. Maria's polite expression immediately vanished. "That is impossible," she said coldly. "It's already decided," Desmond replied without hesitation. Her voice rose slightly as she stood from the couch. "You cannot marry this poor Omega. At least get someone worthy enough to complement your status. He's the only one, Mother. He doesn't have to suit your standards. I am the one getting married to him, not you," Desmond said simply. Maria crossed her arms, clearly struggling to maintain her composure. "I will find someone better for you," she said sharply. "Someone worthy of standing beside a Whitmore." But Desmond didn't even look conflicted. "I'm not interested in anyone else," he replied. He lifted my hand gently, holding it firmly in front of her. I'm getting engaged to Benedict. And that was exactly what happened. Despite his mother's clear disapproval, Desmond Whitmore got engaged to me, a poor Omega with no family, no wealth, and no status. For a brief moment after the engagement, I foolishly believed things might improve, but Maria Whitmore never hid her hatred for me. Whenever I walked through the mansion hallways, I could feel her gaze burning into my back, and sometimes when I passed by her, she would click her tongue softly, or let out a faint hiss of irritation, as though my mere presence offended her. Desmond always tried to comfort me whenever he noticed my discomfort. "Don't worry about her," he told me once while holding my hands reassuringly. "She'll accept you eventually." I wanted to believe him. I truly did. Then one evening, about a month after our engagement, Desmond came to my room looking more serious than usual. He sat down beside me on the bed and gently held my hands between his. "Benedict," he said softly, "I need to travel overseas." My heart immediately sank. "For how long?" I asked quietly. 3 months, he answered. 3 months suddenly felt incredibly long. "My father wants me to personally oversee the construction of one of our new companies abroad," he explained, his thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles. I tried to hide my disappointment, but Desmond noticed it instantly. He lifted my chin gently so I would look at him. "Hey, don't make that face," he murmured with a small smile. "It's just 3 months." "That's still a long time," I whispered. He chuckled softly before leaning forward and pressing a gentle kiss against my forehead. "Then count the days," he said. "I promise I'll come back once everything is settled. Then we will proceed with the wedding." At that moment, I believed every word he said. The morning Desmond left the mansion, the entire place suddenly felt different, as though the warmth that once filled those grand hallways had quietly disappeared along with him. I stood by the tall windows for a long time after his car vanished down the long driveway, holding on to the promise he had given me the night before and repeating his words inside my head like a fragile prayer. 3 months, that was what he said. 3 months wasn't forever, I told myself, and if I just waited patiently, everything would return to normal once he came back. For the first few days after his departure, nothing seemed out of place. Maria Whitmore behaved the same way she always had, distant and cold, but still maintaining the polished politeness she wore like a mask whenever people were watching. And although she rarely spoke to me directly, she didn't openly confront me either. But slowly things began to change. It started with small things that were easy to ignore at first. Then one morning, when I tried to enter the kitchen to make breakfast, the head maid suddenly stepped in front of me with an awkward smile and said the kitchens was now restricted to staff only, explaining that Madame Maria had given new instructions about maintaining proper order inside the mansion. I thought it was strange, but I didn't question it. Instead, I simply went back to my room and waited until breakfast was served. But when the time came, no one brought anything to me until lunch. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. But the same thing happened the next day and the day after that. Whenever I asked the staff politely, they would only lower their heads and say they were following Madame's instructions. Soon even the small privileges I had quietly enjoyed disappeared one by one. The driver no longer responded when I asked for the car. The security guard stopped greeting me. Even the house staff who once spoke kindly to me now avoided eye contact whenever I passed them in the hallways. It felt as though I had suddenly become invisible inside the mansion, or perhaps unwelcome. Weeks passed slowly, each day growing heavier than the last. And although I tried calling Desmond several times, Maria forbade me from using the house line, which had his number, and she took my phone away from me, eventually telling me that Desmond was busy overseas, and that I shouldn't disturb him unnecessarily. "Focus on resting," she would say with that same cold voice. But the loneliness inside the mansion grew unbearable with each passing day. Then one morning something unexpected happened. I had just woken up when a sudden wave of nausea hit me so strongly that I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting into the sink. My hands trembled as I held onto the edge of the counter, my breathing uneven while the dizziness slowly faded. It had been happening for a few days already, but that morning felt worse than the others. I rinsed my mouth and stepped out of the bathroom, still feeling weak only to freeze, when I noticed someone standing quietly in the doorway of my room. Maria Whitmore. She stood there with her arms crossed, her sharp eyes watching me carefully, and for a moment neither of us said anything as the silence stretched between us. Then she slowly walked into the room. "You've been vomiting often lately," she said calmly. Her voice wasn't questioning, it was certain. My heart began to race. She stopped a few steps away from me, her eyes lowering briefly to my stomach before returning to my face. Then her lips curled into a cold smile. "So, you're pregnant." The words left my body frozen in place. I hadn't even confirmed it myself yet, but hearing it spoken out loud suddenly made everything feel real. My fingers slowly moved toward my stomach without thinking. Maria noticed, and the expression on her face hardened instantly. "I knew it," she muttered. For a moment she looked almost furious, then she laughed softly, though there was no warmth in the sound. "How convenient," she said, "trying to secure your place in this family with a child." "That's not true," I started to say, but she cut me off immediately. "Enough," she snapped. Her voice echoed sharply through the room. She took a slow step closer, her gaze piercing through me. "Let me make something very clear, Benedict," she said coldly. "You will not trap my son with this child." My chest tightened painfully. "You forced yourself into my son's life and made him turn against me," she said with a loud, cold voice. Tears already rolled down my cheeks as the accusation hung heavily in the air. Then suddenly Maria's expression changed. The anger faded, replaced by something calculating. She looked around my room briefly before turning back to me. "If you truly intend to stay here and wait for Desmond," she said slowly, "then you will have to earn that privilege." I frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" Her smile returned, but it was colder than before. "You will work." The words stunned me. "Work?" I repeated quietly. "Yes," she said calmly. "If you wish to continue living under this roof, you will earn your place like everyone else." My stomach tightened nervously. "You have no family," she continued, her tone almost casual. "No home, no money, nowhere else to go." Every word she spoke felt like a knife pressing deeper into my chest. "So if you truly wish to remain here until Desmond returns, you will work for it." My voice trembled slightly. "What kind of work?" Maria looked at me with a satisfied expression. "Cleaning," she replied simply. And just like that, my life inside the Whitmore mansion changed overnight. The same mansion that once felt like a shelter slowly turned into something else entirely. Because from that day forward, I was no longer treated as Desmond Whitmore's fiancé. I became nothing more than a maid living inside his mother's house. 3 months. That was the promise Desmond gave me the night before he left. And for the first 2 months, I held on to those words tightly, waking up every morning with a quiet hope that maybe today would be the day his car would appear at the gates of the mansion again. That maybe today I would hear his familiar footsteps echoing through the hallway, calling my name the way he always did. But 3 months came and went, and Desmond Whitmore never came home. At first I tried to convince myself there must be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps the overseas project required more time than expected. Perhaps his father had asked him to stay longer, but as the days continued to pass, the worry inside my chest slowly grew heavier. I tried asking Maria once. Was a mistake. "Madam, do you know when Desmond might be returning?" I asked carefully one evening while she was sitting in the living room reviewing some documents. She didn't even look up at me. "My son is extremely busy," she replied coldly. "You should stop worrying about things that don't concern you." Her answer ended the conversation immediately. After that, I stopped asking. Instead, I continued working, every single day cleaning hallways, scrubbing floors, and washing dishes. And while the days passed slowly, my body began to change. My belly grew little by little, the curve becoming more visible with each month that slipped away. And although the child growing inside me should have been something joyful, the reality around me made everything feel painfully lonely. No one inside the mansion treated me like Desmond Whitmore's fiancé anymore. That title had quietly disappeared the moment Maria declared that I had to earn my stay. To the staff, I was no longer the young Omega their young master loved. I was simply the pregnant mate. Some of them avoided me completely. Others stared openly whenever I passed by, their eyes lingering on my stomach as whispers quietly followed me through the corridors. Sometimes I could hear them. "Is that really the young master's child? Madam doesn't seem to think so. Poor thing, look at him." A few of them looked at me with pity. Others looked at me with clear disdain, as though I had somehow tricked my way into the mansion and was now paying the price for it. But no matter how heavy the whispers became, I continued working. Because Maria Whitmore had made one thing very clear from the beginning. If I stopped working, I would be thrown out of the mansion immediately, and I had nowhere else to go. The months slowly passed like that, my body growing heavier while my hope grew thinner with each day Desmond failed to return. Then the 8th month arrived. By that time, even simple movements had become exhausting, my back constantly aching from the weight of my belly, and yet Maria never showed the slightest hint of sympathy whenever she saw me struggling with my chores. One morning, while I was kneeling in the hallway polishing the marble floor, I suddenly heard the sharp sound of heels approaching from behind. I didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. Maria Whitmore stopped a few steps away from me. "Benedict," she said. I quickly placed the cloth aside and stood up carefully despite the discomfort in my back. "Yes, madam?" She looked at me for a moment before speaking again. "You will be going to the company today." I blinked in confusion. "The company?" Her tone remained calm, almost casual. "You will clean the floors there." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. "The company floors?" I repeated slowly, but she didn't respond. My mind struggled to process the words. The Whitmore Company headquarters was enormous, a place filled with hundreds of employees who worked under Desmond's authority. And Maria was telling me to go there to clean the floors. A knot tightened painfully in my chest. "Ma'am, aren't there already cleaners working there?" I asked carefully. Her expression hardened immediately. "That is not your concern," she replied sharply. "And this should be the last time you ask me silly questions." I lowered my gaze, but the humiliation burning inside me made it impossible to stay silent. "There must be many employees there," I continued quietly. If they see you doing what?" she interrupted sharply. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Working." The single word made my throat close. "You seem to be forgetting something, Benedict," she said coldly. "You are only here because I allowed you to stay." I didn't respond. Her voice grew sharper. "If you are so unhappy with the work I give you, you are free to leave the mansion right now." My heart skipped nervously. I had no home, no family, not even money, and now I was 8 months pregnant. Maria watched my silence carefully before speaking again, her tone suddenly calm. "So," she said, "will you go clean the floors at the company or will you leave?" The choice wasn't really a choice. After a long moment, I lowered my head. "I'll go." A satisfied look appeared briefly on her face. "Good," she replied. And that was how I ended up standing inside the enormous Whitmore Company building later that day, holding a bucket and a cleaning brush, while dozens of employees walked past me through the marble lobby. Soon the whispers began spreading quietly across the lobby, as people slowed their steps to look at me, their eyes moving from my face down to the large curve of my stomach before quickly glancing away again. Some of them looked at me with pity, their expressions soft, almost sympathetic. Others didn't bother hiding their disdain at all, their eyes filled with judgment as if I were nothing more than a disgraceful sight inside such an elegant building. I kept my head down, and I kept scrubbing the floor, because humiliation was still better than having nowhere to sleep. Every morning, I still arrived at the Whitmore Company building with the same bucket, the same cleaning cloth and brush, and the same quiet determination to survive one more day. That Monday morning had started no differently from the others. The company lobby was as grand as always, the tall glass walls letting in streams of bright sunlight that reflected beautifully across the polished marble floors, while employees hurried back and forth, carrying documents and tablets, too busy with their own responsibilities to pay much attention to the pregnant Omega, kneeling quietly near the center of the hall. I had grown used to their stares already, but eventually everyone returned to their work, leaving me alone with the sound of my brush sliding slowly across the marble floor. My back ached as I bent forward slightly, my belly pressing uncomfortably against my thighs while I continued scrubbing the surface in slow circles. Then suddenly something changed. At first, it was just noise outside the building. Then the sound of car doors opening one after another. Within seconds, the atmosphere inside the building shifted completely as several employees near the entrance suddenly straightened their posture, whispering excitedly among themselves before rushing toward the front doors. The whispers spread quickly through the lobby as more employees began walking briskly toward the entrance, clearly eager to greet whoever had just arrived. But I stayed where I was because whoever had arrived had nothing to do with me. So I simply kept scrubbing the floor. The doors opened moments later and footsteps entered the building. Some hurried, some steady, and one set that stood out above the rest, slow and confident, carrying the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to rush anywhere. I didn't look up. My focus remained on the stubborn stain beneath my cloth as I continued working. Then the footsteps moved past me. Tall polished shoes walked right across the edge of my vision, followed by several other people trailing closely behind the same person. Whoever it was, they were important. But I didn't bother raising my head. The footsteps continued forward toward the elevators. Then suddenly they stopped. A strange silence followed. I didn't notice it at first, but the next moment, those same footsteps began moving again. This time coming back toward me, slow and deliberate. I was still wiping the marble when a sudden shadow fell across the floor in front of me. Before I could even react, a strong hand suddenly grabbed my wrist. The sudden contact startled me so badly that the brush slipped from my fingers. I looked up immediately, and my entire world froze. Desmond Whitmore stood right in front of me. For a moment, neither of us moved. His hand was still holding my wrist, but the moment our eyes met, his grip loosened slightly as pure shock spread across his face. His gaze slowly traveled from my face down to my stomach, then back to my face again. Benedict? My heart nearly stopped hearing his voice again after so many months. He looked exactly the same as I remembered, tall, intimidating, his presence filling the entire space around him without effort. Yet the calm composure he usually carried had completely vanished as his eyes remained locked on the large curve of my belly. He couldn't even finish the sentence. I stared back at him just as stunned. Desmond, the name left my lips almost like a whisper. For a moment it felt like I was dreaming, but the warmth of his hand around my wrist reminded me that he was truly standing there, right in front of me after 8 months. His voice suddenly hardened with confusion. "What are you doing on the floor?" he demanded. The question echoed through the lobby. Dozens of employees nearby had already stopped moving, their eyes fixed on the shocking scene unfolding before them. But I couldn't summon up the courage to answer him, so instead of answering, I simply forced a small smile on my face. "I'm fine," I said softly. The moment he saw that smile, something inside his expression cracked. His grip on my hand tightened again. "You're pregnant," he said slowly, his voice growing colder with every word.
"And you're scrubbing floors."
I didn't respond. The silence around us became suffocating. Desmond slowly lifted his head and looked around the massive lobby. Hundreds of employees stood scattered across the room, all staring nervously at their returning CEO. Then Desmond's voice suddenly echoed sharply across the building. "Everyone." The word boomed through the lobby like thunder. People froze instantly. Within seconds, employees from nearby offices and hallways began gathering in the lobby, confused and anxious as Desmond Whitmore's furious gaze swept across the crowd. Nearly 400 people stood there watching. Desmond's voice turned dangerously calm. "Can someone explain to me why a heavily pregnant Omega is on his knees cleaning the floors of my company?" No one answered. The silence grew heavier with every passing second. Then one employee finally stepped forward nervously. "Sir." Desmond's eyes snapped toward him. The man swallowed nervously. "We couldn't do anything about it." Desmond's expression darkened immediately. "What do you mean you couldn't?" The employee hesitated before finally speaking the truth. "It was Madame Maria's order." The moment those words left his mouth, the entire atmosphere in the lobby turned deadly cold. Desmond's jaw clenched tightly as his anger erupted without warning. His voice thundered across the room. "You stood here and watched this happen?" No one dared speak. Desmond suddenly turned toward the assistant who had arrived with him. "Call HR immediately," he ordered coldly. The assistant looked stunned. His voice dropped even lower. "Everyone present in this building today is fired." He glanced around the massive crowd of employees one last time. A wave of shocked gasps filled the lobby. But Desmond Whitmore didn't even look at them anymore. His movements were suddenly much softer now, one hand supporting my back as though I might break if he wasn't careful. Then he looked down at my stomach again, and the anger burning inside his eyes only grew stronger. "Benedict," he said quietly, "we're going home." Within minutes, we were sitting inside the back seat of his car as it sped away from the company building, the city passing quickly outside the tinted windows, while the silence inside the car felt strangely heavy. Desmond kept glancing at me every few seconds. His eyes filled with a mixture of concern and frustration as though he was still trying to process everything he had just seen. "Are you okay?" he asked again. I nodded quietly. "I'm fine," but he clearly didn't believe me. His gaze moved briefly toward my hands, noticing the small scars and rough patches that had formed over the past months of constant cleaning. His jaw tightened again. "Benedict." I looked at him. Instead of answering his question, I asked one of my own. "What took you so long?" The words came out softer than I expected. Desmond exhaled slowly before leaning back into the seat. "On the day the construction got completed, it suddenly collapsed, so we had to start all over again," he explained. "It's a multi-million-dollar project, and my dad insisted I stay there until everything was finalized." He rubbed his forehead tiredly. "I tried calling you many times," he continued, "but every time I spoke to my mother, she told me you were resting and doing fine." My chest tightened slightly hearing that. Desmond turned toward me again, regret written clearly across his face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. The sincerity in his voice made my heart ache. Then his gaze slowly dropped toward my stomach again. How far along are you? He asked gently. I placed my hand lightly over my belly and smiled. Next month is the due date. For a moment, Desmond simply stared at my stomach, the reality finally sinking into his mind. Then suddenly, he pulled me into his arms. The embrace was tight and protective, his hand resting carefully against my back as though he was afraid I might disappear if he let go. I'm not leaving you again, he murmured against my hair. His voice was firm this time, I promise. When the car finally arrived at the Whitmore mansion, Desmond stepped out first before gently helping me down from the vehicle, his hand holding mine carefully as we walked toward the front doors together. The moment we stepped inside, the atmosphere in the house instantly shifted. Desmond didn't slow down. Instead, he walked straight into the grand living room, his grip still firm around my hand. Mother, his voice echoed loudly through the mansion. A few seconds later, Maria Whitmore appeared from the hallway, her expression brightening immediately when she saw her son standing there. Desmond, she said happily, you're finally home. But Desmond's face remained completely expressionless. The warmth in her smile slowly faded as she noticed the coldness in his eyes. Mother, he said slowly, I'm very disappointed in you. Maria blinked in surprise. What are you talking about? Desmond gestured toward me, standing beside him. Maria glanced briefly at my stomach before looking back at her son. Her expression quickly shifted into one of mild annoyance. Oh, that, she said dismissively. Then she sighed. Desmond, you're misunderstanding the situation, she continued calmly. It was his own choice to work. I felt Desmond's hand tighten slightly around mine. I told him many times to leave the mansion if he wasn't comfortable, Maria added smoothly. But he insisted on staying. Her lips curled slightly. The moment those words left her lips, the entire hall fell silent. My fingers tightened slightly around Desmond's sleeve, but I forced myself to stay quiet. My heart was beating so loudly inside my chest that I was certain everyone could hear it. Desmond's mother looked at me with a mocking smile, her eyes filled with cold amusement. But I lowered my gaze immediately. I had already learned that speaking back to her would only make things worse. So I stayed quiet. Just when I thought the tension couldn't grow worse, she suddenly walked closer to Desmond, her voice suddenly becoming sweet and gentle as if nothing had happened moments ago. Desmond, she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. You are a powerful alpha now. You control several of the family's companies and your future is bright. Naturally, you deserve someone better. I slowly lifted my eyes toward Desmond. His face had turned completely cold. Better? He repeated slowly. Yes, she said proudly. Someone with status, someone with connections. She then turned toward the hallway behind her and snapped her fingers. My heart dropped. Soft footsteps echoed from the corridor. Then she appeared. And Omega walked into the hall with graceful steps. Her posture elegant and confident, like someone who had been raised in wealth and luxury her entire life. Her long silk dress shimmered under the chandelier lights, and her beauty was the kind that could easily captivate anyone the moment they saw her. She was dazzling. The Omega stopped beside Desmond's mother and bowed politely. This, she said proudly, gesturing toward her, is the commissioner's daughter. The beautiful Omega gave Desmond a gentle smile, lowering her eyes shyly like the perfect Omega any powerful family would desire. She would make a far more suitable partner for you, Desmond's mother continued calmly. Our families would become even stronger allies. For a moment no one spoke. Desmond simply stared at her, then he suddenly laughed. It wasn't a happy one, it was a laugh filled with disbelief. You are unbelievable, he said. Maria's smile slowly faded. If you want the commissioner's daughter so badly, Desmond continued calmly, then you might as well offer her to father. My eyes widened. The entire hall went completely still. Before I could even react, Maria lifted her hand and slapped Desmond across the cheek. The sharp sound echoed loudly through the mansion. Desmond's head moved slightly to the side as her hand struck his face. You insolent child, she snapped angrily. My heart jumped in fear. Without thinking, I immediately stepped closer and held his arm. Desmond, please, I said softly. My voice trembled slightly. You should ignore everything she said, I continued quietly, forcing a small smile even though my chest hurt. I'm fine and the baby is fine too. Desmond looked down at me. For a moment the anger in his eyes softened. Maria chuckled slightly. Oh, really? She mocked. What baby? Her sharp gaze turned toward me again. For all we know, she continued coldly, that child might belong to some random man you slept with. The moment those words left her mouth, I felt Desmond's body tense beside me. The warmth in his eyes disappeared. His expression turned dangerously cold. The child is mine, Desmond said firmly. His voice echoed across the hall. I trust the words of my Omega more than yours, Mother. Those words stunned everyone. I felt my throat tighten. Maria's face twisted with rage. How dare you, she hissed. But Desmond didn't step back. Instead, he pulled me gently closer to his side. If you want to tell Father, then go ahead, he said calmly. I don't care if I lose my status. I don't care if I lose my inheritance. His arm tightened protectively around me. As long as I have him, that is enough. My heart trembled hearing those words. Desmond's mother stared at him in disbelief. But Desmond wasn't finished. If you truly want another son, he added coldly while glancing briefly at the commissioner's daughter, then perhaps she can give Father another heir instead. The insult was unbearable. Before Maria could even respond, Desmond turned around. Come, he said softly to me, gently holding my hand. I nodded quietly. Even though my heart was trembling, I followed him without hesitation. Together we walked toward the mansion doors. Behind us, Maria's furious voice rang through the hall. I will tell your father about this, she shouted angrily. You will regret humiliating me like this. But Desmond didn't stop. He didn't even look back. The massive doors closed behind us with a loud sound, and as we stepped outside the mansion together, I realized Desmond had just chosen me over his entire family. The ride away from the mansion was quiet. I sat beside him in the back seat of the car, my hands resting gently over my swollen belly, while my mind tried to process everything that had just happened. And even though I had suffered for months inside that mansion, leaving it behind like that still felt unreal. After almost an hour of driving, the car finally slowed. When I looked outside the window, I realized we were somewhere far away from the Whitmore family estate. Tall iron gates opened slowly, revealing a beautiful private estate hidden behind rows of tall trees and wide gardens that stretched as far as my eyes could see. Desmond led me inside the house himself. The place was quiet and peaceful. It didn't feel cold like the Whitmore mansion. As soon as we stepped inside the living room, Desmond suddenly stopped walking. When I turned to look at him, I saw the expression on his face change. It was filled with something heavy. Slowly, he reached for my hands. When his fingers turned my palms upward, I saw his eyes darken. There were small scars on my hands, marks left behind from months of scrubbing floors and carrying heavy buckets of water. Desmond's jaw tightened. I'm sorry, he whispered. His voice was low, filled with guilt. He gently brushed his thumb over one of the faint scars. I should have come back sooner. I shook my head lightly. It's not your fault. But he didn't look convinced. Before I could say anything else, Desmond suddenly pulled me into his arms. His embrace was strong and warm, the kind that made the exhaustion I had been carrying for months suddenly feel lighter. I missed you, he murmured softly. My heart trembled hearing those words. Then he gently lifted my chin. His eyes searched my face for a moment before he leaned down and kissed me. The kiss was slow and warm, filled with months of longing that neither of us had been able to express. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like everything might finally be okay. The next few days passed peacefully. For once, I wasn't waking up before sunrise to scrub marble floors. For once, no one was shouting orders at me. Desmond rarely left my side, always checking if I had eaten, if I was tired, or if there was kicking. Sometimes he would place his large hand over my belly and talk softly to our unborn child, his voice becoming gentle in a way I had never heard before. But on the fourth day, everything suddenly changed. Desmond received a call. I could see the shift in his expression immediately. My father is back, he said after ending the call. He looked reluctant. I have to go speak with him. I slowly nodded. You can go see him, I said softly. I'll be fine. Desmond walked closer and gently held my face. I'll only be gone for 3 hours, he promised. Then he turned to the guards standing nearby. 8 bodyguards. I want every entrance secured, he ordered coldly. Do not leave his side. A caretaker was also assigned to stay with me while he was gone. After giving several more instructions, Desmond leaned down and kissed my forehead. I'll be back soon. Then he left. The house suddenly felt quiet again. I slowly walked around the living room, one hand resting on my belly as I tried to keep myself distracted. But then, a sharp pain shot through my abdomen. I froze. My hand gripped the edge of the couch. Another wave of pain followed, stronger this time. I gasped softly. No way. My breathing became uneven as I slowly looked down at my belly. Another contraction came, forcing a groan from my lips. A small laugh escaped me despite the pain. You little troublemaker, I murmured breathlessly while rubbing my belly. You couldn't even wait for your father to come back, could you? But the pain kept increasing. Soon I couldn't stand properly anymore. A cry slipped from my mouth. The bodyguards outside heard it immediately. Within seconds, the door burst open. One of them rushed forward. I think the baby is coming. I managed to say between breaths. Everything moved quickly after that. The guards carefully helped me into the car while one of them immediately called Desmond. The ride felt endless. Every contraction made my fingers tighten around the seat. But finally we arrived. Doctors and nurses rushed me inside while the bodyguards handled the paperwork. Not long after, I heard hurried footsteps outside the delivery room. Desmond had arrived. Even though the door separated us, I could hear the panic in his voice as he spoke to the doctors. Is he okay? But by then the contractions had become too strong for me to focus on anything else. Hours seemed to pass. Pain, breathing, voices. Then suddenly a loud cry filled the room. A baby's cry. My chest rose and fell rapidly as the doctor gently placed a small bundle beside me. It's a girl, she said with a smile. My eyes widened slightly. I looked down at the tiny baby in my arms. She had soft dark hair and a small face that looked unbelievably peaceful now that she had stopped crying. My heart melted instantly. Just then the door opened. The moment the door opened, Desmond rushed inside the hospital room so quickly that even the nurse beside me stepped aside in surprise. And when his eyes finally landed on the tiny baby resting carefully in my arms, he froze completely in the middle of the room like someone who had just seen the most unbelievable miracle of his life. For a moment, he looked completely stunned. Then slowly, a smile appeared on his face. His eyes moved slowly from my tired face down to our baby wrapped in soft hospital blankets. Then his entire expression softened. Benedict, he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. I smiled weakly at him. She couldn't wait for you, I said quietly. Desmond slowly walked closer like he was afraid the moment might disappear if he moved too fast. And when he finally reached the bedside, he carefully wrapped his arms around both of us, holding us so gently yet so tightly at the same time that I could feel the warmth of his heart beating against my shoulder. Our daughter is here with us now, he murmured softly. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. Then he kissed the tiny head of the baby in my arms. His eyes were slightly red. I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. I shook my head lightly. You made it, I said softly. That was enough. From that day onward, Desmond refused to leave our side for even a moment longer than necessary. And if there was one thing I quickly realized about Desmond Whitmore as a father, it was that he had absolutely no self-control when it came to spoiling his daughter. Just 3 days after we returned home from the hospital, Desmond came back one afternoon with a convoy of delivery trucks following behind him. I stood at the entrance of the house, completely confused. What is all this? I asked. Desmond simply smiled proudly. Just a few things for our daughter. A few things? That was what he called it. But within the next hour, the entire living room was filled with boxes, baby clothes, tiny shoes, soft blankets, toys, and many more. It looked like he had bought an entire baby boutique. I stared at the mountain of items in disbelief. Desmond, she's not even a week old, I said slowly. He looked completely serious. It doesn't matter, he replied. I couldn't help laughing. Even the caretaker and bodyguards were trying to hide their smiles. Desmond then picked up our daughter carefully from my arms and held her like she was the most precious treasure in the world. You deserve the best, he whispered to her. Watching him like that made my chest feel warm. Months ago, I was scrubbing floors in silence, wondering if he would ever come back. Now we were standing in our home with our daughter in his arms. Life really could change in ways no one expected. 2 months later, after enough rest, Desmond decided that it was finally time for something he had promised me long ago. Our wedding. It wasn't a grand ceremony like the extravagant ones the Whitmore family usually hosted. Instead, Desmond chose something smaller, more personal. The celebration took place in the gardens of the private estate where we were living, surrounded by soft lights and rows of white flowers that swayed gently under the evening breeze. Friends, close business partners, and people Desmond trusted were all present. I stood beside him wearing a simple but beautiful white suit, holding his hand while our baby girl slept peacefully in the arms of the nanny nearby. For a moment, I wondered if his parents would come. Desmond's mother never appeared, but just before the ceremony began, a car arrived at the gate. Desmond's father stepped out. The moment he walked toward us, the entire garden fell quiet. He looked older than I expected, but his presence was calm and commanding. His eyes moved toward me, then toward the baby. For a moment I felt nervous, but then he gave a small approving nod. You've chosen well, son, he said to Desmond. Those simple words seemed to lift a huge weight from Desmond's shoulders. During the ceremony, Desmond held my hands firmly while we exchanged our vows under the warm evening lights. I promise I would never leave your side again, he said quietly while looking into my eyes. And I intend to keep that promise for the rest of my life. My heart trembled hearing those words. When the vows were finished, his father stepped forward and placed his hands gently over our heads. "You have my blessing," he said. And just like that, Desmond Whitmore became my husband. That night we celebrated with laughter, music, and quiet happiness under the open sky while our daughter slept peacefully nearby, completely unaware that she had already changed both of our lives forever. Sometimes I still think about the days when I was scrubbing floors inside the Whitmore mansion, wondering how long I could survive under the cruelty of someone who saw me as nothing. But now, as I sit in the garden watching Desmond carry our daughter while she giggles in his arms, I realize something. Every hardship I endured led me to this moment. And for the first time in my life, I truly feel like I'm home. Thank you for staying till the end. Please like the video, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more interesting BL stories. See you next time.